Hi everyone, welcome to my video on the Canon F-1. Let me see if I can get this a little bit better in focus. That looks better. And caught me off guard. I have forgotten to pull up my outline on my cell phone so I could actually read it. But this is the Canon F-1. This is Canon's original FD mount system camera. So the FD mount came out when this was released and was discontinued when this was discontinued. So the mount was coincident with the entire production run of the F1. In the time that the F1 ran, there were actually three variations on the camera. There are these ones. These are F1Ns. So there was the old F1, which looked like these, but had a few slight changes in the locking mechanism and things like that. I think I have that more in detail in my outline. Then there was this, which was an upgrade and a slight modification to the F1. And then there was the F1 New. So the F1N is not the F1 New or New F1. Both terms are interchangeable. So this system is this camera is an interchangeable lens SLR, meaning that the lenses can come off of it and you can use multiple lenses on it. It is a semi-spot metering camera with a 12% metering area. In the second video, when we look through the camera's viewfinder, we'll see a little bit better about what that means. But if, in general, there are a few different ways that cameras can meter a scene. There's averaging, which means it takes the entire scene and averages it as though it was looking at an 18% gray card and then determines the exposure. There's what's called spot metering, which is where it just takes a small spot in the center of the image and meters off of that. And then there's also what's called center weighted. And this is a very small center weighted metering system, a 12%. So it's semi-spot. It's partway between spot and metering, which is about 3 to 5% of the image, and center weighted rather, which is usually about the middle 40% of the image. So this is a 12% metering area. The shutter speeds on this camera are from 1 second to 1/2000th of a second. And we'll take a look inside this camera really quickly, and you can see that 1/2000th of a second is, all right, we'll take a look inside this camera, there we go, is really fast for a cloth focal plane shutter camera. Typically, most cameras that have a cloth focal plane have shutter speeds only up to about 1/1000th. So one of the things that lets you know this is a professional level camera is that the shutter speed goes up that high. Through the viewfinder, through the standard prism viewfinder over here, it has a 0.77x magnification, 100% magnification, basically, with a standard 1.2 diopter. That's just the way that these come. It has 97% of viewfinder coverage. Over here, this one's fitted with a speed finder, and the speed finder has 100% magnification. I believe it's got a standard 1x diopter. I could be mistaken on that. And 100% viewfinder, or 100% frame coverage from up to 6 centimeters away from the back of the viewfinder. It's the best viewfinder I've ever seen. It's pretty amazing. I wish I could get that for every camera I own. It has an interchangeable focusing screen. And I've done another video. I haven't uploaded it yet because I broke one of my cameras doing it, where I demonstrated how to change the focusing screen. But this camera, the system camera, has more components to the system than any other system ever made. It's really pretty darn fantastic in that regard. And it has 13 focusing screen options. Originally there were 4 on the old F1s, and then when the F1N came out, this model, they upped it to 9, and both F1 and the F1N could use all 9, and then the new F1 had all 13 available to it, but only 9 are available to the F1s and F1Ns. So I have this with the standard E viewfinder, and this has the grid D viewfinder, because the grids are the best viewfinders. This has X and FP flash sinks. So let's talk a little bit about this camera model's history. This was the consummate professional level camera of its day, and it's really is an amazing camera. Its target market was professional, high-end, workhorse camera needing customers. And these cameras do last quite a long time, and they're very reliable. It had the largest system. Now, what do I mean when I've said a couple times it has the largest system, and that means it has the most parts. And what that means is that if you take the total number of lenses, viewfinder prisms, focusing screens, the data back, the tripod, the 250 film or 250 exposure cassette back, and all of the other stuff that you could buy for this if you had more money than sense or the need to have some of these things, it meant that you had at your disposal the most flexible and versatile camera available at the time, and arguably the most flexible and versatile camera still available. The amount of things you can do with these is just phenomenal. So give me just a second here. What I'm going to show you is what the camera itself actually looks like while we're here talking about the system aspect. So this is the camera. That's the back, the inside. And you can even take this out. This is the focusing screen. If you want to know exactly what just the most basic elements of this camera look like. Set that on its side so it doesn't touch anything. This is the Canon F-1. And by taking parts out of it and putting new ones in and swapping them and all kinds of great and crazy things like that, you could take this camera body and customize it to any need that you had as a photographer. So let's say that you wanted to do a motion capture of a plant sprouting in the spring or something like that. We could take the 250 image or 250 frame back, put that on, set an auto timer, automatically repeating timer for it, set it up in front of your subject, and just go away for 24 hours. Have it take 10 pictures every hour, one every 6 minutes, and come back, and you have an hour's of, or however many frames left over, hour and a half's worth. Change out the film and do it again. And so basically, whatever creative goal a photographer had, the F1 could support it. So enough F1 lust for right now. The camera was designed to capture the largest possible image range, is what I just said. All components of the camera system were easily interchangeable without losing accuracy. Canon spent a lot of time and quite successfully delivered a result which was very precise engineering. So I don't need to shim the focusing screen that I put in. With other cameras, lower end cameras or other systems, you can change out the focusing screen, but you have to put very, very thin shims in to fine-tune its placement so that the lenses focus properly. Well, Canon put so much time into engineering these components that that's just not required for these systems. And these cameras had the tightest production tolerances of any camera manufactured, to the point that these cameras were, at the time that these cameras were manufactured, which was 71 to 92 for the whole production run. So in addition to having the most components and the most interchangeability, the components had to be of the highest quality of any camera maker's components that were concurrent with this. And it was the shutter itself and the camera were designed to have at least 100,000 shutter actuations. Now to me that doesn't sound like a lot. I'm filming this right now on a Pentax K7, that's what I film all my videos on. And the K7 shutter is rated for 100,000 actuations, which means my K7 is halfway through its lifespan. But 100,000 shutter actuations when these were made was a much different and proportionally larger number than it would be today. Because today now, 30, 40 years, 42 years after these were originally introduced, the lessons that were learned manufacturing these have been made commonplace in the camera industry. And so also the equipment and technology have improved, so the production tolerances that were revolutionary and very difficult to achieve for this model of camera can be had more commonly today. For similar entry-level cameras back in the day, I would not be able to guess how many shutter actuations their shutters were good for, but it would shock me if it was more than maybe 20 to 25,000 before they started running into issues. The shutter and mirror also, and this is something that might be unique to all of my film cameras, have a braking device built into the shutter mechanism that reduces the mechanical noise. And I would submit it also reduces the impact that the mirror has on the camera body, thereby reducing camera shake. And so, let's see if this, I'm going to unlock this. Going to advance there we go, that's what I should have done a while ago. And I just locked it. So now I'm going to unlock it for real. So you could hear, that's a pretty quiet shutter. I'm actually going to hold the camera right up next to the microphone. Sorry about that. I hate when I do that. So what I did was I held up the camera to the back and then each side of the back and then each side of the front as I clicked those three shutter actuations. And you can see it's really very quiet. I'm going to grab my friend's Olympus OM10, which was actually a younger camera than this, and I'm going to hold it up to the microphone. I have it on self-timer. Let's try that again. I'm going to hold it up to the microphone. So let's try that again with the OM10. So you could hear the OM10 is a slightly louder click. Now, in fairness, I did take the lens off the OM10, and I did not for this, so apples to apples. That second one was the Canon, and I also actually was like holding the microphone inside the Canon, so it was a lot closer to the microphone. At any rate, so it has a very soft, and I will tell you, having held both of those right next to one right after the other, as I did that, the F1 had much less shutter shake than the OM10 did, partly because it's a heavier camera, especially with the prism. But at any rate, enough about that whole point. I've probably beaten that dead horse enough. So Canon produced this. They made them all in Japan. And the first one, the OM, what's now called the old, the F1, what's now called the old F1, was produced from 1971 to 1976. It wasn't called the old F1 first. It's much like the Raleigh Old Standard. You might have seen that video of mine from a month or so ago. It was called the old F1 after the F1N came out, and the new F1 and so forth. And so the old F1 was made from 71 to 76. In 76, they released the F1N, and that was produced until 1981. And then in 81 until 1992, they released the new Canon F1, it was called. The F1 was the first FD mount camera and the last. FD mount camera. And in its production run of 21 years, there were many, many other FD mount cameras, the AE1, A1, AV1, so on and so forth. And it was quite the system. It really was an impressive system. It was preceded by the FL and R mount cameras. It was concurrent with every other FD camera, and it was followed by the Canon EOS cameras. So when the F1 went out of production, Canon canceled the FD breech mount system and made it obsolete and brought the EOS EF system out, and that became the Canon standard. But I'll tell you, I've used EF lenses and I've used FD lenses, and I really much prefer the image quality of FD lenses. I know the coatings are better on the EFs, and engineering is probably better, and the manufacturer's probably better. I just like the image quality on these old FD lenses a lot more. So now if you have your instruction manual, let's grab it. I actually don't have mine, so I'm going to be going off memory here, so I apologize if there are some inconsistencies. But we're going to go through the camera's top, front, back, insides, underneath, and take a look at what each of these components are and what all the buttons and dials do. So for this part of this, I'm switching back to the other body. It's just a little bit lighter and easy to move around. And so here's the top of the Canon F1. And what we have over here, I'm going to take off this flash mount really quickly. The standard hot shoe was an adapter. The flash coupler F, it says on it, so that's what it was called. And that's what it looks like, and it just connects to the hot shoe over here. And then you can mount a standard electronic flash on your camera. So you can see this camera's had a lot of use and been used very heavily in its life, actually. At any rate, so here's the camera's top. Over here we have the film rewind knob, that's this, and the lever which folds out from it. Also, like many professional cameras, and some high-end cameras as well, we have a film back release button. So with most cameras you just lift up the knob and the back pops open. Well, with this camera that doesn't happen. There's a locking mechanism in here, so you have to push that button down, that silver button on the front, and lift, and then the camera back pops open. And that's really nice because when you know, as a professional photographer, if you accidentally open up the back of your camera, then it's not just your holiday photos or your cousin's wedding photos or whatever which are lost, it's your income for the day. Next we have the flash mount, and the flash mount is the old style flash mount. It's around the film rewind. This is actually a better place for a flash mount than on top of the camera because it moves the flash off center. When you have a flash that's just lined up like this, it makes the image very flat. But even moving it slightly off center angles the flash across your image and will give some depth. Not much because it's not that far off center, but a little bit. The next thing we have the, I lost my spot. Flash mount speed index. We have the speed index over here. You can see where it says, might be able to see where it says 400. That's your film speed. So you change it by lifting up on the knob and just spinning it back and forth. 200, 100, up to 800 for crazy fast film shooting. Then over here we have, I don't know why the manual did this out of order, but they did. I still haven't found it. I'm just going off of what I remember from it and my notes. Over here we have the the light meter illumination window. So what happens is, let's say you're standing in a dark alley or inside or something where you have shadow covering your camera. Well, what's going to happen is that you're not going to get a ton of light into your light meter, so it makes it a little hard to see. But that's a rare exception because typically there's light where you're taking a photo, And you might want to be taking an image of a dark subject. This happens to me fairly often, where I can't see the light meter in my camera because I'm looking at something dark and the light meter needle or whatever is black. Well, this allows light into the window, into the light meter, so that if you have light around you, even if you're taking an image into a dark area, you can still see the light meter. And we'll see how that functions in the second video when we look through the camera's viewfinder. Here we have the Pentaprism Mount. So I'm going to take this off. This is the standard Pentaprism. You can see it slides right off. So this is the Pentaprism Mount right here. And inside here's a standard E focusing screen. I missed this one, but we have the film plane indicator right here. And these are good for if you're doing macroscopy or microscopy rather, or macro photos, and you need to measure from the exact film plane to your subject. Film speed index, film speed dial, showed you that. Film ISO setting, that's the number. Shutter release button right here. That's the button which releases the shutter, and it has a lock mechanism, which is not super easy to use all the time. So you can lock it and then you can't accidentally take an image. There we go. The film advance lever, which is this right here, so after you take a picture, then you just advance the film to the next frame. And it's got a really short, really short draw on it. It's got one of the shortest draws of any camera I own from this period. And one of the reasons is because if you're a sports photographer in the days before auto winding systems were commonplace on cameras, then it was really helpful to have a short draw because it reduced the amount of time required to advance the film, and you could take more pictures in a second. Where do we see? Shutter release button, shutter button, lock, film count window. Over here, this is where you would count the number of exposures that you've taken. That's your film count window. This silver pin right here is your EE servo pin, and there's a prism finder I don't have that's got a servo built in. Don't entirely understand what it does or what makes it special, so if you know, feel free to leave a comment explaining it. But that's the pin that couples to it. I think that it might do some kind of aperture priority thing. I'm not entirely certain. Then the last thing we have, the film speed, the shutter speed indicator rather, and then the shutter speed dial that tells you what your shutter speed's going to be. That's the top of the camera. So the front of the camera here, sort of turn it over so we can see it. There's a lot on the front of this camera, a lot more. It looks very simple because there's a single dial and the lens mount, but there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye at first. So here we've got the strap lugs right here and here, and that's where you would connect your camera strap. And then we've got the breech mount lock and your prism. Now here I'm going to show you a little bit about how some of these things work inside the camera. So what we have here is this contraption does a lot of things. It's your self timer, and this white dot right here, not this lever, but this white dot is your self timer. To set it, you move this lever all down here, and now watch the self timer. So the self timer is actually what's counting down, and you don't have to move the lever back up. You can leave it down and the self timer will take it back into its upright position. I just do out of habit. Some bad habits just don't go away easily. This lever, when you push it in, becomes your depth of field preview. So you can see it's moving that little lever right inside there. When you take a picture, what happens is the first thing you do is you hit the shutter release, and then you set your lens at, say, f8. Well, when you're viewing through your lens, you're always looking through it wide open. So if you're using a lens that's got a fast aperture of f2.8, you'll always see through it at f2.8 unless you do a depth of field preview. So when you push the shutter release, that shuts. You don't have to push the lever for it, but this shuts down to the proper level, which shuts the lens to f8. The mirror pops up, the camera takes a meter reading, Oh no, I'm sorry, this camera doesn't then, just ignore that last part. This camera does not then take a meter reading. Then the shutter plane, the film plane shutter curtain opens, exposes the film, closes, the mirror flops back down, and then the lens is opened back up to f2.8 or whatever this widest setting is. All in a 60th, 125th of a sec, maybe a little bit longer than that. But the shutter speed plus a very, very short period of time. So when you push this in to get your depth of field preview, that's what that lever does. Now, this is your mirror lockup lever. And so this is what you would do to lock your mirror upright. Nope, there we go. So you just saw how I did that. We'll go through it again. Okay, so you move it to lock. Right now this is unlock. Normal function, you want to leave it like this all the time. Move it to lock, depth of field preview. Now when you have it in lock, it locks the depth of field preview lever in place. So this is if you want to take a longer look at what you're doing at your depth of field, you can do that. Or if you, I forget what the other use identified for that for was. Anyway, but once this is locked up, now you move this little lever from lock, which is L, to M, and it pushes the mirror upright. Now this is really good for things like microscopy and macros and astrophotography, where any camera movement is highly, highly detrimental to the image quality. You can also do it if you know for a fact that you're going to take an image at a certain spot in a few seconds, and instead of you can use this in conjunction with your self-timer, for instance, and some other things. And locking the mirror up prevents the mirror from causing vibrations in the camera, which even if you have a really good tripod, the vibrations can go down the tripod and then come back up about the time that you're going to be making the image, and can introduce a little bit of camera shake to it. So it has some uses, and really the number one use is with astrophotography, in my opinion. That's the number one use, and most important use. Aperture mirror. Oh, over here we have another lever. That is the communication lever, and this communicates data about the lens meter. I forget exactly what that communicates. Oh, I know what it is. This communicates the lens's aperture setting, and this controls the lens. This stops it down during the image, but when this is pushed down, that tells the camera what the lens's aperture setting is. That's it. Yes, I remembered. Man, my brain is exhausted for today now. Okay. On the back, we have, well, we'll start on the side here. On the side we have the flash socket. That is, I don't know which socket that is, honestly. I think that's just your standard PC socket. There is not an FP socket on this camera. I think. If someone has her manual and didn't lose it like I did, please correct me in the comments. So on the back, then we have this dial, and there's on, off or flash, and C, and if you move it to C, it pops back down. The C is in dark blue, so you might not be able to see it. And so on turns on your meter, off turns it off, and but you can still use your flash with off. I believe you can still use your flash when it's set to on, but I'm not 100% sure about that because I really don't use flash that often. This is your battery check button. So if you want to check to see if you have battery power, you just move it up to C, and when you're done, you let go of it, and then it automatically pops off of that. Camera meter on and off buttons. Here's the eyepiece. Now the standard Prism has a screw mount eyepiece. The Sport Finder does not. That's just one difference. So the type of eyepiece you're going to have is dependent upon which prism you have. And so if you had to have a different need for a different eyepiece, like a magnifying eyepiece, and most of them have this circular screw mount on the back of them, then you just need to pick a prism that fits your needs. We also have the serial number over here. The Canon F-1 Japan insignia. I believe this is not on the old F-1. I think this is just on the F-1N and maybe the new F-1. And the memo holder, or as you can see, the previous owner's address and name. He was quite the photographer. He really was. I've seen some of his work. It was amazing. And at any rate, so this is where when you would use your film, you would put the film in it. Or you tear off the lip of the film cartridge and pop it in there, and then you have the film back, which is interchangeable. On the underside, you have your battery door, tripod bushing, and film release. So there's no place on the old or the F1N to hook up a motor drive. I think there was on the new F1, but don't quote me on that because I don't own a new F1, so I'm not 100% positive. Now inside the camera, I'm going to show you something interesting here. All of the Canons, I believe all Canon camera bodies and the vast majority of their lenses after a certain date, and I don't know what the date was, will have a 4-letter code printed in matte ink on the inside of the body or somewhere on the lens. And that's a manufacturing date and location code. So you can find sources online, and I cannot find it right now, otherwise I would put a link to it in the description, and if I can find it again, I will come back and put that link in. But that will tell you what factory it was produced at, and the month and the year. And I believe that's as detailed as it gets. But it's pretty interesting, and I found it, and I used it at one point to date all of my Canon equipment. That was before I got these two F1s, and it was interesting to see when, like, my Canon AE1 was made, and I think it was made shortly after I was born, which is pretty neat to see. It was pretty close to my birthday, if I remember correctly. Very early in the production run as well. At any rate, can't speak to these yet. I haven't refound that site. Also inside, so over here we have the film cassette chamber. This is where you'll put your 35mm film cassette. And then we have the film rails. These outer ones keep the entire film, piece of film, properly aligned. These inner ones keep it flat along its focal plane. Over here is a little roller wheel that helps guide the film onto these outer film rails, so that it stays properly aligned in the camera and it doesn't get jammed. I have had film get jammed in a couple of cameras. Usually it's film that I've loaded at home. It's a nightmare when it happens. This is the film sprocket, which helps control tension and prevents it from being rewound prematurely. Here's something also that's going to be really interesting, maybe not. I could be lying when I say this is interesting, but it's interesting to me. So let's watch how the film take-up spool advances. You can see that it moves in the same direction as the arm there. So I'm going to grab my buddy's OM10 really quickly, and let's hope that I am correct in my guess about this. Good, I am. I just verified it to make sure. So I'm going to hold this here. Now watch the film take-up spool when I advance this one. Moves in the opposite direction of the film advance lever. Now why that's important is because when the film is unwound, it has a curl to it, and the curl lines up with the direction that this is taking the film up. Also, the emulsion is wrapped inside of the film spool, and what that does is, with the OM10 for instance, the emulsion is wrapped along the outside. So if you have any dirt inside of your camera, the film emulsion is unprotected for an entire round of winding. So if there's some dirt in there, it's going to scratch your film emulsion and ruin your images. For this one, the film emulsion is only unprotected for this space, so there's a much lower risk of your emulsion being damaged by dirt inside of your camera. And that's another professional level feature that this has. And I don't know if that's more complicated to make or engineer than the other way, because I only have a couple of cameras that do that. But so it's definitely an oddity, and definitely something I only have on two high-end cameras and one German-made entry-level camera from the 1930s. It's strange, I know. Haven't figured out that yet. Anyway, so and then we have the cloth focal plane shutter right here, and on the back, on the film back, move this over, we have the tension plate right here, and then we have these two rollers which help keep tension on it, and then we have a little spring over here, very little spring, that helps keep the cassette in place so it's not rattling around inside the camera when you're using it. And all of these things in conjunction help to keep the film extremely, extremely flat. In fact, this camera kept film flatter than anything else that was really available at the time. At least anything else 35 millimeter that was available at the time. The Pentax 6x7 could keep 120 film flatter than this could keep 35 millimeter film, or equivalently flat at minimum. But it really is very, very well engineered and is designed to set people up to take good photos. And to that end, it's why it's a perennial classic that even if it's not a fully functional camera, will still fetch a lot of money on eBay. So if you would like to add this to your collection, oh, come on. Sometimes this one doesn't like to shut. So if you'd like to add one of these to your collection, unless you luck out and find them at an estate sale for dirt cheap, like I did, you can expect to shell out quite a bit of money for these because they are still highly in demand, because they are still reliable and still high quality cameras that are very usable today. So we've got a couple other notes here. This has a mechanical shutter. So what that means is that even if the battery dies, you can still take pictures. You just don't have a light meter to go off of. So the batteries only control the light meter. Then also, man, I hate it when I leave the Nikon information about lenses in my outline. Alright, skip that. So here are some camera don'ts for this. Remember, don't ever touch the shutter. So the shutter that we were just looking at, don't ever touch that. That is going to result in your camera becoming a brick. It's just going to be good for stopping doors and holding down paper on your desk. Touching the shutter is a really great way to destroy an otherwise perfectly good camera. Do not touch the mirror, because the acids and the oils on your fingers will cause the mirror to become desilvered, and that will reduce your image quality. It'll reduce the quality of light coming through the pentaprism, which will make it harder to focus properly, and that will reduce your image quality. Do not leave your camera or lenses in your car, because the heat can cause the oils to thin and get into parts of the camera where they shouldn't, and that will, in short order, ruin your camera. It can also damage the light meter and things like that. The cold, if you leave it in your car in winter, can cause the oils to freeze and break down, get into places where they shouldn't once they thaw out, or just be less effective, and the end result is that it damages your camera. Also, if you leave your camera in your car during the summer, the batteries can explode, and that's another really great way to ruin your camera. Don't store your gear in a plastic bag. That can cause fungus, and you don't want that. That'll destroy your lenses for sure very, very quickly. And also, don't let your camera get wet, because these are not weather-sealed cameras. Even cameras that were weather-sealed, which I don't think there were that many of them back in the 70s, at 40 years old, would not be weather sealed anymore. But don't let them get wet. Try to avoid allowing moisture to get in them, because that's another really good way to ruin your camera. You'll get rust inside the camera and the mechanism won't work, and those are some problems. So that's the end of this first video. We're going to do the second video now here, and it's going to be a little bit more in depth. We're going to look at how to use some of these features in concert, and now that we've talked about what all of them are, we'll take a look through the viewfinder, and completely lost my train of thought. we'll take a look through the viewfinder, see what you see through it, both with the standard prism that's off screen and the speed finder. And we'll take a look at the speed finder too. It's a pretty cool prism. I actually should probably do a video about that prism. It's so amazing. So also, if this video was helpful to you, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and that my videos are useful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment box. I really like to see what you guys have to say, and I'm pretty good about answering questions fairly quickly. If you have suggestions for other videos, let me know, and I'll film them. I'm pretty good about, well, I have a really, really long queue right now, but I will film them someday, at any rate. And one last thing I wanted to say. Oh, two last things. Also, if you'd like to see more videos that I have coming up, please feel free to subscribe to my channel and you'll be notified when I release a new video. And lastly, thank you for watching.